The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores, scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. The abbey was amply provisioned, with such precautions the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was a folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within, while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad. The Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of a most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, but first, let me tell you of the rooms in which it was held. In the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass, whose colours varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. For example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple trees, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange. The fifth was white. The sixth was violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceilings and down the walls. But in this chamber only, the colour of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood colour. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme. There were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its presence at all. It was in this apartment, also, that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that at each lapse of the hour the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance. It was a gay and magnificent revel, but to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the seven there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-coloured panes and the blackness of the sable drapery apples, and the revel went whirringly on, until length there commenced the sounding of a midnight clock, and then the music ceased, and the evolutions of the waltzes were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. And thus it happened. There were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumour of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz, or murmur, expressive of disapprobation and surprise. Then finally, of terror, of horror, and of disgust. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask, which concealed the visage, was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse, had gone so far to assume the type of the Red Death. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, he was seen to be convulsed, in the first moment with a strong shudder either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded coarsely of the courtiers who stood near him, "who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements." Music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was then that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of the deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of a velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterwards fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then summoning, with wild courage of despair, a throng of revellers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mermaid whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask, untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revellers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out. And darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all.